Welcome to SVCN's How to Apply for the California Relief Grant Program in collaboration with California nonprofits. We're really excited to host them here. They've been a great resource for everyone in the state to really be able to understand this somewhat confusing application process and make it as seamless as possible for nonprofits to access really, key funds that can help you in all of the great work that you're doing. So with that, if we can go to the next slide. So just a little bit about the program and the next slide after that. Zoom closed captioning is available for accessibility. You can activate it at the bottom of your screen. You should see a live transcript button. If you don't want it there, there's a pretty easy way to disable it as well by clicking hide subtitles. So if anyone needs help with that, feel free to message me or Marissa in a private message and we can help you out. In the next slide. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat throughout the program. We'll have a couple different opportunities to pause and take questions via the chat. So feel free to send them as we go along if things come up. And if you pre-submitted a question at registration, we've already sent those to the speaker, and we'll make sure that we'll try to address them as many questions as we can by the end of the program. And with that, I think we can go ahead and introduce our speaker today. Sue Sigler is a former member of CalNonprofits Board of Directors and a consultant in private practice, specializing in working with nonprofits in the areas of strategic planning, organizational growth, fundraising, and advocacy. In 2021, she has assisted over 2,000 nonprofits to access COVID relief funds from the state's California Relief Grant Program. So she is, the expert in helping nonprofits get this money. So we're really excited to have her. And with that, Sue, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Dana, and hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you today, and we're going to go through everything you know and everything you need to know in order to be able to apply for the California Relief Grant Program. Next slide, please. And just to introduce CalNonprofits a little bit, we are the statewide membership organization for nonprofit organizations with a membership of more than 10,000 nonprofits. Our role is to advocate for nonprofits with our state government and legislature. And our role in this is as an application partner. We're selected by Lendistry, which is the company that was selected by the state of California to administer the program as an application partner. And our role is to help guide you through the application process, answer any questions, and ultimately to help you be successful in your application. I want to let everybody know that I am available to you. Most of our sites will have my email address in the footer at the bottom. So please don't hesitate to contact me after the webinar if your question isn't addressed or if you need additional assistance. And you can also find lots of information on our website at calnonprofits.org, which is also listed at the bottom there on the left. And when you visit our website, you will see recordings of prior webinars. And in particular, I like to guide people to our frequently asked questions, or FAQs, which is really an application guide. It is designed to, be a companion, be right there on your desk as you're filling out the application. It will help you gather your documents and information so that once you get around to filling out your application, we estimate that if you are well prepared, it will take you less than an hour to get through applying online. And one of the things that you'll see when you apply is that you're asked to choose a application partner. There are many to choose from. We will assist you no matter what application partner you choose. And the role of the application partner is to provide you with a link to start your application, which is also available on our website. And as I said earlier, to help guide you through. We have to give a hat tip to Jan Masaoka, our CEO. The history of this program is that originally it was intended only for small businesses, and through her leadership and advocacy, nonprofits are eligible to qualify for these funds as well. Next slide, please. And there again is our contact information. And again, please don't hesitate to contact me with any questions you might have as you go through the process. Lendistry also has a helpline, which is good for technical assistance or any questions that I can't answer. Next slide, please. One of the things that I'm always sure to emphasize with applicants is that unfortunately there are fraudsters and copycats out there. So please know that it costs nothing to fill out this application. If you're asked to pay for anything, that is a fraudulent request. Communications will come to you from the domain name lendistry.com. Anything else is not legitimate. And Lendistry's website is at careliefgrant.com. Unfortunately, there are some copycats out there that say careliefgrants.org or things like that. You just want to be sure that you're interacting appropriately with Lendistry because you are going to be providing them with some proprietary information through the process of your application. Next slide, please. There are currently 2 rounds open for applications. I'll back up and say that the very first round of this program was made available beginning December 20th of last year. And initially, the legislature provided enough funds for 2 rounds of applications. The response was beyond overwhelming, and the legislature has since added funds twice more to the program for a total of $4.5 billion available to small businesses and nonprofits. And they've arranged those in application rounds. Round 8 is open through both round 8 and round 9 are the final rounds. We do not anticipate any additional funds to the program nor further opportunities to apply. And round 8 is open through September 30th at 5 p.m. It is for certain types of arts and cultural organizations. And if you'd like to see if you are eligible for that, please see the FAQs on our website. It will list all of the organizations that are eligible to apply in round 8. And I will also note that round 8 has a unique address for the application, and you can find that in the FAQs too. And so to say that again, there is a different portal for the application for round 8 and the application for round 9. Next slide, please. And we'll take a look at round 9 for a moment. There is $500 million available, and the grants are fairly small. So that means many, many people are going to be getting grants in round 9. And if you're a prior applicant, if you were waitlisted, or if you have an application status that says awaiting selection process, that means that you are on the wait list and your application will automatically roll over for consideration in round 9, and you don't need to apply. Once again, that application is open until 5 p.m. on September 30th. I know many people are used to seeing applications that are open through the 24-hour period until midnight on the final day for applications, but please do note that it closes at 5 p.m. Already, over 7,000 nonprofits have been funded through this program. So please tell others about this opportunity, whether they're a nonprofit or a small business. And let's go on about how to apply in round 8 or round 9. Next slide, please. As I mentioned a moment ago, if you applied in an earlier round, you do not need to reapply except under certain circumstances. You want to log in to check your application status. And if you need a refresher on that for current applicants, again, you can see the FAQs on our CalNonprofits website. I'll mention that you can only receive 1 grant from this program, and I mentioned a moment. So if you have already received a California Relief Grant, you would not be eligible to receive a second one, regardless of what round you placed your application in. And I mentioned a moment ago that if you're currently on the wait list, that will automatically roll over to next rounds. I want to highlight one thing in particular, that there were a number of people who applied very early in this grant program back in January or February in rounds 1 or round 2. Unfortunately, there was a problem with the way that the applications displayed in the partner portals, and many people didn't, applying in those rounds, did not notice that there were two different applications to select from. Consequently, they may have filled out the wrong application, meaning a small business application if you're a nonprofit, or vice versa. So if you were an early applicant to this program, we strongly encourage everyone to log in and check your status. There is a code that will tell you which application you filled out. That's detailed in the FAQs. And if you filled out the wrong application in an earlier round, you do need to reapply before September 30th at 5 p.m. using a different email address than you supplied in your prior application. And if folks have any questions about that, please feel free to contact me. Next slide, please. The big question we always want, how big a grant can I get from this program? What can I apply for? This screenshot is a drop-down menu that you'll see when you're filling out the questions on the application. And this program is very different from other types of grant programs that we're used to applying for in several different ways. One of those is that the grant amounts are preset. And so you can see here that if your annual revenue is between $1,000 and $100,000, you're eligible for a grant of $5,000. If your annual revenue is $100,000 to $1 million, you're eligible for a grant of $15,000. And if your annual revenue is $1 million to $2.5 million, you're eligible for a grant of $25,000. There is an exception to that upper limit revenue cap for round 8. The select arts and cultural organizations, there is no revenue cap. So anybody over $1 million would be eligible for a grant of $25,000.
Setting up Google Chrome for the application process.
I beg your pardon. Let's see here. One of the things I want to highlight is that this is a grant, not a loan. Some people get a little confused with the federal PPP program. This does not need to be paid back. And the way that your annual revenue is determined will be from your 2019 Form 990. If you file the 990, the full form, or the 990N, you'd be looking at either line 9 or line 12. And a 2019 990 is a requirement for this program with no exceptions. So if you don't have that available, I'm afraid that organization would not be able to qualify. And for smaller organizations that file the 990 postcard, there is an issue that the postcard does not list your gross revenue. And so you need to provide some additional documentation. You can either look to the state of California's Form RRF that is submitted to the California Attorney General's office, which does list your gross revenue, or another piece of documentation like a profit and loss or income statement from 2019 is sufficient, or even just a bank account statement that showed that you had more than $1,000 in deposits in 2019. And we'll go on next to the other eligibility requirements for the program. You must be a 501c3, C6, or C19. And you can be a corporation, an unincorporated association, or a cooperative. I mentioned a moment ago that you must have your 2019 tax filing available, and that has to show a California address. Some organizations have headquarters outside of the state, and if the 990 address is showing outside the state, unfortunately, that will not qualify. I mentioned the annual revenue requirement a moment ago. Additionally, you have to have been in operation on or before June 1st, 2019. Note that it does not require that you were incorporated or had your tax exemption from the IRS by June 1, 2019. But if those documents are dated after that date, then you would need to provide some additional documentation, whatever you might have, a contract, a social media post about an event, something like that, that would show that you were in operation on or before June 1st, 2019. You have to have a physical address associated with your application. PO boxes cannot be accepted. It's part of Industry's fraud prevention measures, to verify a physical address. Folks who use a PO box can simply use a home address for one of their board and staff. This is a program for COVID relief, which is why that requirement of having been in operation in 2019. And to be able to qualify, you have to either have remained open during COVID times, or if you were sadly forced to close, to have a clear plan to how you'll be reopening when you are permitted. And we're going to talk a little bit more about expenses, but you have to have had at least $1 in eligible expenses in the period of March 1st to December 31st, 2020. That was when March was when the COVID shutdown unfolded. And I'm quick to note that you will note that the grant amount that you are eligible to receive, once again, is not based on what you request. It is based on what you're eligible to receive. And there's not a one-to-one relationship between the grant amount and your eligible expenses. You merely need to have qualifying eligible expenses. And those could be our typical operating expenses like occupancy, rent, or mortgage, if the mortgage was in place prior to June 1, 2019. So rent, mortgage, utilities, insurance, payroll, as long as you have not already funded those expenses from another grant program. Of course, there's no double dipping. Again, all of that is detailed in the FAQs on our website. I'll also mention that this grant has no narrative, which is why I can say that you can get through it relatively quickly. You don't need to have employees. All volunteer organizations can also qualify. And we'll note that this is not intended for startups or for future funding needs. It is not intended as a general support program for nonprofits, as we might typically be applying to. It is conceived of as relief for those organizations that were able to continue operating or need to reopen as a result of COVID. And next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we hear you, Marissa. Are you able to switch slides?
Oh, that's okay, no problem. I just wanted to make sure I hadn't dropped off. I'll go ahead while we're waiting for the next slide. And we've just talked for a moment about who is eligible. We also need to touch on who is not eligible. Unfortunately, fiscally sponsored organizations are not eligible to apply, and departments of other organizations. So oftentimes we apply for a grant by program or by department, and there is one grant available to the organization as a whole, whatever entity files the 990. So a program doesn't file its own 990 and would thus not be eligible to apply for the program. And I will note also that many nonprofits have board members who list themselves as the applicant. And so any one individual can be listed as the applicant on one small business application and one nonprofit application. Continuing on.
Sorry, we have a technical issue with Marissa, so I'm going to switch screen shares 1 second.
Okay, no problem. There we go. All right, we're all caught up. In choosing who to list as the applicant on your application, that Lendistry will check, does rigorous fraud prevention. And one of the ways that they do that is to check your statement of information that is on file with the California Secretary of State. That the statement of information will list 3 people who are principals with your organization. It may be your board members, or it may be your CEO if you have one. And it will also list who is the agent for service. There's nothing wrong if somebody is listed in both places of listing them as the named applicant. But if the person, and this happens sometimes with CEOs, that they're named as the agent for service, but not as one of the principals, and they will not accept the agent for service. The name of the applicant has to appear among the principals on your statement of information. And if you're not sure who's listed there, go to our FAQs. There's a link where you can check quickly and easily. Next slide, please. Before we stop for questions for a moment, I will also mention a couple of things, that there are no paper applications. This application is filled out completely online. And if you didn't file your 2019 990 yet, many organizations take extensions. Lendistry is aware of this. We don't yet have the final date for which they will accept a 2019 990, but if that's not available yet and you're expecting it soon, go ahead and apply, because you will have additional time beyond the deadline for applications to upload those documents. And I'm going to stop for a minute and turn and ask if there are any questions in our chat box.
There's just one so far, confirming if your annual revenue is over 2.5 million, are we not eligible?
The answer is, if you're eligible to apply as one of the named arts and cultural organizations, you can do that with a round 8 application. But if you are applying in round 9, the income cap is 2.5 million for other nonprofit organizations. And there's more information about that in the FAQs on our website. All right, we'll move on then. Next slide. As you're interacting with the application online, I will note that it can be a little finicky. It's essential that you're using Google Chrome as your browser when you apply or whenever you log back in to check your status. Other browsers like Internet Explorer or Firefox will return errors in the application, and people can get stuck and unable to move forward. So please be sure you're using Google Chrome as your browser whenever you interact with the application. And there are some more tech tips if something's not working quite right for you on the FAQs on our website. Excuse me. Next slide, please. In order to prepare to start your application, we recommend that first you gather your documents. We've already talked a bit about your tax forms, and you'll also need your articles of incorporation, and you'll need a government issued photo ID for the applicant, such as a driver's license or passport, and that must be a current ID. It cannot be expired. You'll also need the application certification form that is linked in our FAQs and on our website, as well as on the Lendistry website. Many people confuse the application certification with the application itself. It's not the application itself, which is filled out online. It is one of the required attachments, and it's where you certify that all of the information that you've provided in the online application you filled out is true and correct. There are a couple of other things that are requested if they are applicable to you. We mentioned a moment ago the state RRF1 or additional income documentation if you're a 990 postcard filer. Also, if you have them available, a certificate of organization, a fictitious name registration, which is also known as a DBA or doing business as, and a government issued business license. For example, I serve on the board of a community music center in Berkeley, and that requires a business license from the city of Berkeley. Next slide, please. The next thing we want to do is find your gross revenue for 2019. We've spoken about that, and they will ask for gross revenue from a 6-month period in 2019 and the same period in 2020. They are looking to see what the impact of COVID was on your organization. Most people showed a revenue drop year over year for those periods. And if you didn't show a revenue drop, you can still apply. But those applications that did show a revenue drop will have a higher priority. So we mentioned taking a look at this in advance. You may need to consult with your accounting staff to get your gross revenue April 1 to September 30, 2019, and that same time period in 2020. When you're calculating the revenue for those two time periods, do not include any government assisted COVID relief that you received. That might include PPP, EIDL, or if you have any county or city government sponsored COVID relief programs, you would not include that in your gross revenue for those two time periods. The reason for that is you'll be asked to provide that later in the application. The application will not give you a large space to include that. So if you have multiple grant sources in that government COVID relief category, when it asks you for the number, you would enter the total of all your government sponsored COVID relief. When it asks you which program you received it from, you would choose the largest. And then you would type out a Word document that just lists the government COVID relief from each grant source that you received on a line and how much, and you would include that as an attachment and upload it with any of your other documents to the application. Next slide, please. I talked a moment ago about qualifying expenses, but I think it's worth it to review that more than once. The qualifying expenses, if you had at least $1 in qualifying expenses, March 1 through December 31st, 2020, could be rent, mortgage, utilities, regular operating expenses, payroll, anything related to operating during COVID. So if you had to convert programs to online and there were expenses related to that, that's an example of expenses related to COVID. If you had to buy hand sanitizer or personal protective equipment or install plexiglass, all of those are eligible expenses. If you had to purchase equipment, we know many grant programs don't fund equipment, but if it was related to continuing to operate in the COVID environment, that is an eligible expense under this program. And as we mentioned, no double dipping, that if a given expense has already been funded by another grantor, you would not, that would not be a qualifying expense for this program. And the way that the qualifying expenses and the grant amounts are arranged can lead to some confusion. And so if you have those qualifying expenses, you don't have to list them out. You don't have to gather them. You're not going to be asked to list them on the application. You simply need to have that documentation available should you ever be asked for it. And if you receive a grant, you don't need to go back in and open your books from 2020 or code it in that particular way. In essence, when you receive a grant, you can treat it as general operating funds and use it in whatever manner you choose. Next slide, please. To start your application, you can either go to careliefgrant.com where you can see a list of the universe of partners that you can choose, or if you'd like to choose CalNonprofits as your partner, the link is right there. It's also on our website and in the FAQs, it's calnonprofits.mylendustry.com. And again, we just want nonprofits to apply for the program. If you don't choose CalNonprofits as your partner and you have questions, we are the only partner who specializes in working with nonprofit organizations, and we're happy to help you get your application placed no matter what partner you choose. Excuse me. Every partner portal will have both links to a nonprofit application and a small business application. And it's really important that when you go to the application website that you double check that you are using the nonprofit application, if that is what is applicable to you. Also, please save your link. There are about 30 different possible links to start an application. And so you want to make a note of which one you chose, because you'll use that link in the future to return to your application, either to upload your documents or to check your application status whenever you like. Next slide, please. When you go to the application portal, this is the first thing that you'll see. Don't try to set up an account before you start an application. It doesn't work that way. Instead, if you're a first-time applicant, look on the left where that red arrow is pointing, choose click here to apply, and you can start your application. You can start an application, hit save and continue, log out and return to finish your work later on if you want to. And in that case, anytime after the first time that you log in to start your application, then when you log in the future, you'll use those boxes on the right where it says existing customers sign into your application. When you so much as fill in a name and an email address, you will then, the Lendistry system generates an email to you with a temporary password and again, the link. You want to save that email as for a quick and easy way to get back into your application whenever you'd like to. Next slide, please. Next, we see this is where you want to look if you're a nonprofit organization. There will be on the application you want to select, there's a black bar that says grant program for nonprofits. It's grayed out in my screenshot here, but below that, that apply now button will be purple because the application is now live. You click there and that starts your application. Remember, if you are in round 8, there is a unique application. Please find that in the FAQs on our website. Next slide, please. There are some features on the application that are handy for some folks. If you need accessibility features, that is a button at the top of every page of the application. If you need language assistance, that is a button that's on the top of the first page of the application. And the list that's showing here is not inclusive. They've added more language support, and you can find that at careliefgrant.com if you need language support in something that's not listed there. Next slide, please. One of the other features on the application pages, that arrow on the top right is pointing to watch video. So you can click on that and see a video about how to fill out the application. And one of the things that I want to highlight is that I mentioned it was CalNonprofits Advocacy that allowed nonprofit organizations to be eligible for this grant. That was the good news. The bad news was that we won that right at the 11th hour, and the application was already developed for small businesses. So in essence, we are filling out a small business application that's been modified slightly. That means that some of the questions are not going to be intuitive for nonprofits. They're not going to be phrased in ways that we are used to seeing. And on page 1, one of those is they will speak about the owner details. The owner is whoever is the named applicant for your organization. So owner and applicant are used interchangeably. And down at the bottom, that red arrow in the center is pointing to a question that says, tell us, it says, what percentage of this organization do you own? We know that nonprofits don't have owners. Lendistry also knows that nonprofits don't have owners. You can just hit type in 0% there and continue on. So one of the other things that I'll say is that you'll see other drop-down menus where the universe of responses are not don't seem applicable to nonprofit organizations. You have to fill in every question on the application in order to be able to complete it. And so if something doesn't make intuitive sense to you, just do your best to choose from the choices that you have so that you can continue to move through the application. Lendistry knows that those choices are not, nonprofits don't fit neatly into the choices that are available to them. Next slide, please. One of the other things about this application is that there are some priority areas. There are 4 that are named. That's emergency food, emergency housing, childcare, and workforce development or job assistance programs. You'll see that the drop-down menu also says other. You do not have to be among the 4 priorities in order to qualify for the grant. If you don't, if you're not under one of those categories, simply choose other and continue to move on. Don't try to fit into a category that really doesn't apply to you. It's okay if it doesn't. And so let's go on to the next slide. Here is a question that says, how can we help you? And this is one of those places where the drop-down menus may not apply to you. But there is a question here about your employee count. I think most people who are experienced grant writers are used to counting heads in terms of FTEs and full-time employees. And there are two questions there, though, that people do find a little confusing. One of those is the number of jobs that you created in 2020. That would be any new jobs that you created, or if you had employees who were laid off and recalled before the end of 2020, you would add those up there. They ask the number of jobs retained, and that's simply the number of employees that you had at the end of 2020 on December 31st. One of the most frequently asked questions that I get are, should I include my contractors in the head count for our employees? And the answer is no. And the reason for that is because any independent contractors that you work with can apply on their own for this grant as a small business. Next slide, please. Here in business demographics, there are a couple of things to note. One is you'll be asked questions like, is this a women-led business? Please tell us about disabilities or ethnicity. These questions should pertain to the named applicant in your application or to the bulk of your senior management team. They can be answered either for the applicant or the majority of your senior management team. And looking at some of the specific questions on the top left there, that arrow that's pointing down is a question that says, what is your customer base? Is it B2B, B2C, or both? That B2B means business to business. B2C means business to consumer, and most nonprofit organizations are business to consumer. On the right there, those two arrows have some drop-down menus where frequently there's not a neat choice for nonprofit organizations. If you see one that applies to you, go ahead and select it, but if not, it's okay to say unknown. Over on the left there, that second red arrow is pointing to something that says, what is your NAICS code? NAICS stands for the North American Industry Classification System. Those of you who have done government grants in the past may be familiar with this and know what your NAICS code is. If you're a larger organization, there are certain schedules that you file with your 990 that will also list your NAICS code. If your NAICS code appears on your 990, it's important that you use the same one. They will match that up in reviewing your application. And if you don't know what your NAICS code is, you can follow that arrow to the neck over to the right, and it says click here to find your NAICS code. That will take you to a website where you can describe what you do, and it will help you locate the proper NAICS code. Additionally, in our FAQs, the US Census Bureau operates a service called Dr. NAICS, and you can email or call them. They're very responsive, and talk to them about what you do, and they will help you locate your NAICS code. Next slide, please. That top arrow on the left is pointing to a question that says at least 51% of your revenue are derived from services in the 4 priorities. And it's, once again, it's okay to say no. And then that middle red arrow on the left is pointing to the place where you will enter your income information from that period in 2019 and the same period in 2020 that we talked about earlier. And those pink boxes down below are where you will enter the information about any other government-sponsored COVID relief assistance that you received. Remember that I mentioned it'll ask you which program you got funding from. If you got funding from multiple other programs, you'll need to write out a Word document, list what you received, and attach that with any of your other documents. In selecting your answer to that question, you will select the program that you got the largest amount from. And if you got multiple grants in that second question in the pink box, you would add the total of what you received from government assistance programs for COVID relief. Next slide, please. this is what you will see when you get to the end of part one. You will see here that it's telling you what type of application you filled out. This is to prevent the problems that folks had in the earlier rounds with selecting the wrong application. And that arrow is pointing to a line where you will type the word yes. If you're not ready to finish your application, you can hit save and continue later, receive that password email, and then log back into your application to complete it. If you type the word yes, next slide, then you will see that red arrow is pointing to submit. And we want to make a note that once you click submit, you cannot return to this application to view it or to change your answers. You will also not be given an opportunity to print out your work. So what we recommend is, if you'd like to save a record of how you answered the questions, to take a screenshot of each of the pages of the application. If you do make an error, there are ways to communicate with Lendistry about that, and that's detailed in our FAQs. And once you click that submit button, congratulations, you've made an on-time submission. You still need to go on to uploading your documents, but you have met the application deadline. You have more time to upload your documents if needed, but we don't yet know what the final day is that Lendistry will accept your documents and attachments. So we recommend providing them as soon as possible so that Lendistry can process your application faster. And next slide, please. So once you complete part one and you've got that email with your temporary password, you want to log out and log back in to upload your documents. When you log back in, you'll see a status message. We'll show you that in a moment, and it will have a button where you can click to upload your documents. You will see a list of the documents that you can upload, along with a button next to each of them that you click to do that. All documents must be provided in electronic form, and try to upload the documents to the proper category, but don't worry about it if you didn't. Lendistry will sort that out for you during processing. A note about documents, there's a 15 megabyte limit. If your document is larger than that, some lengthy 990s are, then you will either need to compress that document if you know how, or you can separate it into two documents, but be sure to label it clearly. For example, 2019 990 part 1 and 2019 990 part 2. Next slide, please. Whenever you go in to check and see, you can check your status application, the status of your application whenever you like after you've applied. If you haven't yet finished your application, that red message will say incomplete. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that part 1 is complete. This is also where you check to make sure that you filled out the wrong form of application. The code in blue will tell you that. CRG means you filled out a small business application. CRG NPO is the nonprofit application. And CRG AC NPO is the arts and cultural application for round 8. And I already mentioned that if you were an early applicant to the program, it's vitally important that you check that your status message for what form of application you use, so that if you do need to reapply, you can do that before it's too late. We'll also see there on the status message the amount that you applied for. Again, the amount that you asked for is not the same as the amount that you're eligible for. If you made an error there, Lendistry will correct that, and you'll see the button there that you click to upload your documents. Next slide, please. This shows all of the possible status messages you might see when you log in. I mentioned there on the left earlier, incomplete, if you still need to complete your application. The next one might say awaiting selection process, or it might say on the wait list from earlier rounds. That means that your application has been received. The terminology that Lendistry uses is a little complicated for some nonprofits. When it says that your application has been selected, it doesn't mean you've been selected for funding. It means you've been selected for processing. And then your message will change to selected pending validations. It means that they're processing your application and verifying your information. If Lendistry has questions while they are processing your application, they will contact you. If they don't have any questions, you may see your grant status change, and also the next thing that you'll receive is a grant agreement via DocuSign. So you want to watch your email for communications from DocuSign. Be sure to check your junk and spam filters too for DocuSign and Lendistry communications. And once you receive that grant agreement, you have 3 days to sign it. If you miss that window, it's no problem. You just call Lendistry and ask them to send you another, and they do that. And then hopefully you move to that status of grant funded. When you are, after you've completed your grant agreement, Lendistry will provide funds directly to your bank account. You're asked to provide your banking information along with your password. This is kind of freaky for some folks. We're not used to doing that. There's more information about why it's requested and how your information is protected in our FAQs, but it is required to receive a grant. Lendistry does not send out any paper checks. How rapidly we'll receive it after you sign your grant agreement depends on a couple of things. It usually takes several weeks, and it depends on how rapidly your bank processes those incoming transactions. So you can check your bank account, or you can log back in to see if your grant has been funded yet or not. And then next slide, please. And we're going to stop again for questions. Before we turn to the chat box, I know we had a question submitted in advance from somebody who said that they applied, but they hadn't heard back yet. So I hope that the information we just provided on how to log into your application was useful. That's what you should do, is try logging in and check your status message. And what you see there in red will tell you what you need to do next. If your application is incomplete, you can still complete it. If it says on the wait list or a waiting selection process, it's been received and there's nothing more for you to do until you hear from Lendistry. If it says not selected, that means that there was an issue with the application and it was declined. In that case, you have to call Lendistry to find out what was the reason that it was declined. And if you think that's an error or it doesn't make sense, contact me because I can help in those situations. So, more questions?
There's a couple in the chat. So organizations that received the California Relief Grant last year, are they qualified for this year?
You can only receive one grant in total from this program, no matter when you applied.
Okay. And are the arts and cultural org requirements the same for round 9 as round 8? In other words, if ours is not an arts and cultural org, do we qualify for round 9?
If you are an arts and cultural organization, you want to go to the FAQs on our website in our application guide, and there is a list of the NACIS codes that qualify for round 8. If you're a 501c3, C6, or C19, and you meet the other eligibility requirements, but you don't see yourself in the eligibility for round 8, go ahead and apply in round 9.
Okay. We are a religious organization, Temple Beth El in Aptos. Am I eligible to qualify? We do support other programs like Jewish Film Festival, or are there contractors who can be retained to assist?
So in general, religious institutions do not qualify for funding except under certain circumstances. If your programs are organized under a separate 501c3 and they have a 2019 990 available, then they can qualify. If, however, many religious institutions take the federal exemption to not file the 990, and if you don't have that 2019 990, then unfortunately you cannot qualify for this program. There is also a narrow list of programs that they will sponsor really from a religious institution that are primarily in the childcare and educational areas. There's more information about that on our nonprofit. On our FAQs. When you get there, you'll see it says, do you have this? It's an if then. If you have this and that, then you can apply. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the FAQs on the CalNonprofits website to see which criteria you might meet.
Great. Moving to the next question. If we need to reapply, do we need to have a different person apply? Since you mentioned that we would need to use a different address, Also, do we need to create a new account to apply again, or do we reapply under the same account?
So you will not be able to apply under the same account. If you need to reapply, you need to start all over again like it was the first time. You can use the same applicant name again, but you must use a different email address than you supplied on your prior application. Lendistry tracks applications via the email address. And if you try to start an application using the same email address, you'll get a pop-up that says you're already applied and it won't allow you to go forward.
I am the executive director, but I am not listed on the SR 100 as an officer. If we apply using our board president's information as the applicant, who is the person on the SR 100, can I still use my email address for the application?
You can still use your email address. I'll make a note that this application also asks for personal information from the named applicant in the form of date of birth and social security number. It's unusual and uncomfortable, but it is required for the named applicant. It is used for verifying identity. They are going through a rigorous process to prevent the fraud that has happened in some other state programs for COVID assistance. And they do what's called a soft credit check on the named applicant. It does not affect the applicant's credit score. It is merely to verify identity. I'm going to ask us to move to the next slide. We can still take questions, but there's some information we can put up there while we're doing that. Do we have more questions?
That's it for now, folks. Take another minute or so. If you have questions, feel free to send them in the chat.
Okay. While we're doing that, just want to make sure that we have our resources up there again. You can find the FAQs, application links, application guide, recorded webinars, and any late breaking updates on our website at calnonprofits.org. If you go to California Relief Grant, you can find ways for small businesses to apply, language assistance, information on other partners that you might want to select, and lots and lots of how-to videos on how to fill out your application. Next slide, please. There we go. Oh, that notice in the box on red, it was from my slides and not from SBCN. So I don't know if you have a YouTube channel or not, but I did hear you say, Dana, earlier that you're planning to distribute the recording. Correct. Again, there's our contact information. I'm listed there at the bottom. I actually answer my phone and emails in a timely manner. So please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any other questions or problems or anything at all that I can assist with.
We have one more question, just clarifying, the same person can be the applicant as long as they use a different email and create a new account.
Right. I remember that you can't create an account before you apply. The way that you create an account is starting an application, and then that will generate that email with the temporary password from Lendistry. And yes, you can use the same applicant name a second time, but you need to use a different email address. Any application that you filled out prior remains in the Lendistry system, and they're sorted by email address. So if you don't use a different one, it will say you've already applied. But that's not true for the applicant name.
Great. Any other questions? Seeing none so far, you have Sue's email address here on your screen. If you have follow-up questions, we will have this recording and we'll go ahead and share it out with folks. And that FAQ page is going to be super helpful as you start your application and go through it. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Sue, for being with us and sharing all of this information. Are we missing any slides, or was that the end of it?
That was the end of it. Thanks so much for having me with you, and good luck to everybody who's applying.
Take care, everybody. Have a great day.